Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hi.
Hi.
Good morning.
Morning. I will bring Lori back on the screen. There's a little bit later. There's a question sometimes of why is Lori cropped out? I mean, of course, Lori is of supreme importance. But the main thing is so that she doesn't have to be on camera during my whole talk and feel self-conscious about to being there. So I will reframe it when we go into discussion so you get the full benefit of my ever-present partner here who plays such a big role in everything. Mark, welcome back. And Brandon, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
It's nice to have you. And to everybody else, it's an honor, a privilege, and quite the responsibility when you all show up, and keeps me going, keeps my training sharp, and I appreciate all of you and all of your efforts. Galen, question for you. I saw a Facebook post. Were you down here at the Buddhist for Black Lives Matter protests yesterday? Galen?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Yes, Brandon drove down there. I give him a lot of credit. He came all the way from Cabazon to Los Angeles, picked me up en route, and we both attended.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, thank you. Can you tell the guests, either Brandon or you, Galen, why did you go?
Alexa, Bluetooth.
Why did you go?
Not connected to sculptor's tools.
I'm not really sure. What am I hearing? I'm hearing somebody.
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to mute everybody and then unmute you. Hang on. Okay.
Well, you know, I actually asked myself the same question, you know, since I've been back, why did I go? Because I'm not sure, of course, about the outcome and you know, the effect. And, you know, that was one of the first things that Brandon and I talked about on the way back, you know, is what good does this do? You know, and from the little I perspective, I guess, you know, that it has a way of making my life feel relevant. You know, sometimes living in the mountains, I have, you know, I spend a lot of time with my trees and flowers, and you know, I don't get a chance to interact with very many people. I've been pretty isolated for 90 days. But another thing is our Friday night recovery Dharma group is fairly diverse, and we have one particular person, black lady, that's a very good friend of mine. I mean, we've spent hours and hours and hours together, and she is, you know, she's suffering greatly, you know, about this, and it's starting to come out and listening to her talk on Friday nights, and you know, so I think being just participating, just, you know, is you know, I feel a need to have her see more than just words about this, because, you know, racism is something that people have talked about all my lifetime, you know, from one point of view or another. And, you know, I was involved in politics in the 1960s, the late 60s and early 70s, and it was a big issue then, and there's been a lot of talk, you know, but at some point in time, you know, this practice tells me I got to put my body into it. You know, this is not This is not a philosophical practice. This is not mental gymnastics. It has something to do with, the whole of the being. So, it was good for me. And, the group was described to us as a loosely knit group of local Sanghas. And it was incredibly diverse. And, a great number of Asian people showed up. People from GCLA were there. Vietnamese had a tremendous contingency. White Plum was well represented. There were quite a number of Rakshas that I recognized. It made me feel good. And basically, it was a funeral procession. It was very quiet, very slow in terms of marches, and then it was a memorial. And what good did it do? Have no idea. But it was nice to be part of it.
Thank you, Galen. Brandon, I know it's your first time with this group, but anything to add?
Well, I guess I'd reflect a lot of what Galen said, but as I've been interacting with all this mostly through social media, talking to friends and family about all of it, and listening to Jean, the person that Galen mentioned, and actually a lot of my family is Black as well. My wife is Black, and all my in-laws, so I've had a lot of contact with their expressions and feelings. And it's I guess it really, I've been feeling like okay, I need to hear these people, and I feel like I need to do something about it, but I'm really not sure what to do. And I guess it just seemed like going out there and being there, and somehow might be the right thing to do. I guess it's still really unclear to me, but it seemed like it might be effective in doing something to change all of this.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing, and thank you for going. The event we're referring to is Buddhists for Black Lives Matter, that actually gathered yesterday morning, not too far from here. I'm a little bit ashamed to say that I and Lori found out about the event after the fact, because we easily could have and would have been part of the event as well. But Galen and Brandon, thank you for being there and representing in the way that you did. I want to take this back to, there is one possible answer, and I don't want to put words in Brandon and Galen's mouths, but there's the koan case 45 in the Mumonkan, who is that one that we've hit on a number of times recently, and I think I'm going to keep hitting on it until I really get it, till we really get it, and that is end of Tozan said, even Shakyamuni and Maitreya are servants of the one who is that one. And I think a beautiful answer to that is the memorializing, as was done yesterday with the help of our two friends here, of those whose lives have been lost. Under the color of authority is a new phrase I just learned. And I have to go look it up, but it's a legal term, under the color of authority, that is used to explain or absolve action performed by police and other authority. So a lot of these events, a lot of these killings go unpunished or unresolved under the color of authority. So, memorializing these people, the ritualization of that, and recognizing that, as Galen said, we need to put our whole bodies, our whole beings into this. And as the movement says, say their names. Say their names. Philandro Castile, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks. We have the mysterious hanging of Robert Fuller in Palmdale on Saturday. Say their names, right? It's a slogan of the protest, but it's also the point of this koan. Who is that one? Who is that one? We've also talked about our story, our own story about looking down the manhole cover, the open manhole cover in the street. What is down there? Who is down there? Is that my own shadow down there? How do I rescue that person? What do I do? As Brandon said, I'm left wondering, what do I do? And I think a lot of us have that question. 2 weeks ago, I touched on the idea of race itself as a concept, like the whole idea of race being another one of those concepts that we need to break through so that we can remove the objectiveness and separateness of the other person based on skin color. What is this whole notion of black and white? And I had a very difficult conversation with an acquaintance of mine over many years. And we talked about color blindness, and she is an African-American woman. And sometimes these things are hard to hear, but she just like snapped back at me and said, color blindness is a concept created by the white man to silence black voices. Now, you can agree with that or disagree with that, and I'm sure we can find varying voices, but it did set me a bit back on my heels. Is this, from her point of view, trying to say there is no color in this, is to try to erase or suppress the voice when clearly there is color in this, whether we want there to be or not. It's even in that phrase, the color of authority. I mean, so anyway. And so we as a family and community have been trying to sort this as white people. And our son, Nick, who many of you know is a little guy, he sent along a video, which some of you may have seen, and he said, hey, Dad, this might help. It's helped me understand my role as a white person in this. And I'm going to play the video in a moment. But in terms of, well, how do we work with this video? Laurie said, well, aren't the Buddhist precepts running all through this? Isn't our training, isn't our practice all about this? So before I play the video, I'll play a little workshop facilitation trick. I'm going to read, I'm just going to read the precepts so that they're fresh for us in our minds. And then when I play the video, I want you to play it against the precepts and see what comes up for you as you're listening to the video. So the 3 pure precepts: I vow to do good, I vow to do good for others, I vow to stop all evil. And then the 10 essential or grave precepts follow. First, I vow to appreciate and affirm all life and not commit murder. Second, I vow to respect others' possessions and not steal. Third, I vow to honor the body and not be greedy. Fourth, I vow to be truthful and not to lie. Fifth, I vow to be sober and attentive and not cloud the mind. Sixth, I vow to refrain from talking about others' errors and faults. Seventh, I vow to refrain from elevating myself and blaming others. Eighth, I vow to be generous and giving and not be stingy, especially with the Dharma. Ninth, I vow to refrain from indulging in anger and hatred. 10th, I vow to refrain from speaking ill of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So I want you to just hold those for a moment and let me share this video. And hopefully all the technology will work as it should. The woman you're about to hear, her name is Sonia Renee Taylor. I don't know if you know her or not. She's a performance poet and activist and author. And she has wrote a seminal book called The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love. This is about a 7-minute video. Can you see it on the screen? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Okay, and hopefully you will be able to hear it.
What's up, y'all? I'm hoping this will be a quick video, but I wanted to respond. I just had someone in my DMs ask me about this video that I posted that's gone viral about the little white girl, Haley, arguing with her parents about Black people. And what I want to raise to white folks' awareness, because she's being touted and heralded as "Go Haley," and I appreciate what Haley's doing, and she's young, and she's doing something, and so I appreciate it. But here's where conversations with white people miss the boat, and what y'all are missing in these conversations. Haley was having a conversation about Black people. Haley was arguing with her parents about whether or not Black people were worthy of life. Literally. The fact that that is a conversation is the problem. And that is actually what it was that Haley needed to be pointing out. Haley needed to be pointing out that whiteness and white people are so bereft of humanity that they will have a conversation about whether another group of people deserve to live. That white people need to be talking about whiteness. Stop talking about how hard Black people are suffering like that is happening in a vacuum. Like Black people are suffering at the hands of some amorphous blob we call the system. Black people aren't suffering at an amorphous blob called the system. Black people are suffering at the hands of whiteness and white people who live inside the delusions of white supremacy and construct systems and structures to enact the delusions of white supremacy. And so the conversation doesn't need to be about whether or not Black people are struggling in the ghetto. The conversation needs to be about why white people made a ghetto. The conversation needs to be about why white people made chattel slavery. The conversation needs to be about why white people created redlining. The conversation needs to be about why white people created mission assignments in Black and brown countries and then went to murder them. The conversation needs to be about why white people needed colonialism. White people need to start asking about their whiteness. Stop sitting around the table with your family debating about whether or not I deserve to live. The fact that you can have that conversation is the root It is the root of the sickness that is white supremacist delusion. That white people actually have the right to sit around their kitchen tables and debate the humanity of other people's existence. Stop. When you find yourself in a debate about whether or not Black people are worthy, the work is to stop in that moment and say, this conversation is white supremacy. We are sick. And don't not include yourself when you're talking to your family. We are sick. Do you hear us talking about some other group of people as if they are some sort of object? What in us objectifies other people? What in us makes us want to do that? What in us has made it so that we created the concept of Blackness? What in us is so detached from our own sense of humanity that we could watch people be murdered on video and still go on about our regular lives like there's no big deal? What in us is so disconnected from any sense of compassion that we have had to construct system after system after system to try to tell ourselves that we're better than everyone else? As soon as you start talking about other people, stop and start talking about whiteness. Start talking about your own, not even complicity, your own shovel and bricks that you have been laying into the system of white supremacist delusion. That's what you need to do. That's what Haley needed to stop that whole conversation and say, we are sick. Listen to us. Right now, we are debating a whole group of people's lives like they're some sort of object. What in us makes us feel like we would even have the right to do that? What's wrong with us? That's the question. That's the conversation I want white people to start having with your family members. What's wrong with us? What's wrong with us that this whole system of policing that was born out of slave catching, that we still even want this? What are we so afraid of inside of ourselves that we've constructed an entire world of disconnection and violence to protect us from ever having to look at ourselves? That's the work of whiteness right now. Not to be sitting around having conversations about what Black people doing with the shambles that you have left our community in. You need to be talking about why you are inclined to leave the world in shambles. Not walking through the shambles talking about, look at the mess y'all left here. No, look at the mess you left here. So I appreciate Haley as a young person trying to figure out how to challenge the ideas of her parents. But the problem is that she's challenging the ideas of her parents on the bodies of Black people. And the conversation is not about need not be in your house when you arguing with your white family about Black people. The conversation in your house needs to be about the sickness that is whiteness. The sickness that is whiteness that created the police force and pays the police force to put their knees on our necks until we die. That's the system that you need to be talking to your white family about why they are so deeply invested in. And what in them is so bereft of connection that they've constructed the kind of heinous violence that we see all around us. It's time to turn the conversation towards you, white people, and turn the conversation towards what whiteness has wrought in this world and how you excavate it from yourself so that we might all survive. What's up, y'all?
Okay. I have a few things I could say about that, but I think before I give you any more of Dan-ness and teacher-ness and priestness, I'd like to just get reactions. any thoughts that that raises for you. You can unmute yourself and dive in. Well, you're already unmuted.
I'm going to start because I'm just really aware of how much training we've gone through, many of us in our lives, consciousness raising, awareness of who we're being in so many ways. In the precepts, just, taking the vows and going through the year of study to really learn and understand the precepts from a very root level. This is work that we all have to do on this very subject. And I think it's important for us to tackle it. For our generations, we represent a few generations here in this group. And I think that we can really make a difference this way. And what we learn from that, we can come out into the world having been trained out of that whiteness. That's just what comes up for me.
Thanks. Go, Melissa.
So what comes up for me is how much the Zen principle of kind of dualism comes up in this conversation. Not only the conversation of white versus black, but also the conversation of male versus female, of gay versus straight. Like any sort of differences that we have, in one way, there's the argument that we are all the same. And why are you even seeing a difference, right? Which is a lot of what she was saying, which that absolutely makes sense at times. But at other times, it's important to actually see the differences and even celebrate the differences. Like with men and women, for example, we're different. And so I feel like my Zen practice helps me hold both of those things at the same time, because we need both. Right? The ability to all be one and the ability to have important differences at the same time. And they're not in conflict with each other, but the key is to be mindful about when you're doing one or the other, right? When you're seeing a difference versus a similarity, and knowing that they both exist. So that's what resonated with me when I was listening to her.
Thanks, Melissa. Go ahead, John.
Very, very thought-provoking. And, I go back to kind of the concept you talk about race, and it only exists in language, in the ontology of language. And then we act as if it's real, like there's distinction. Even black and white are coded words to describe something. But, I'm not really white, but it's a coded word to say I'm white. But I think what she points to is very good, is we're in conversations that aren't distinguished, like arguing with somebody about them having a right to live, it all only exists in language. And we get to choose the conversations. We get to choose the conversation that persists. And this, what she's inviting us to do is like drop the old conversation and start a new conversation. And what I hear is it all goes back to humanity. Maybe we have some evolutionary reason why we distinguish that tribe from my tribe and me from them. And I don't know, maybe there's some humanity, but it gets out of whack. And what she's invited us to do is have a new conversation. Don't all humans have a right to exist? And she points me to, it only exists in concepts. It's not structural language, it's descriptive language. White, black, them, me, him, her. But I get a chance to go back to, I'm human, we're human, we're all human. And I think that gives me a distinction to stand in, is the meanings that we put on these concepts, and how they're used as barriers and dualistic. they're very dualistic, as you pointed out. Dualism separates me from, and separates them from me. It's very, very, very good talk. Thank you.
Yeah, and John, as I said in a conversation I had 2 days ago with a friend of mine, she also hit on what Melissa was saying, is that both things are true. You know, I mean, these distinctions are codified in the system already, so to pretend they don't exist is also not right. You know, so I agree with you completely, and we've already hit on that these are concepts and don't exist in fact, but they do too, you know, and her point also was that don't, from your context, go, we are all one, and assume that that oneness is your oneness, and therefore suppress my expression of who I am. And you know, it's a razor's edge. It's a really
Yeah, and that's not where I'm. That's not. It's giving me access to something. Is kind of the concept I use. It's not to stand in. I don't hear it. It doesn't exist. It exists because it persists.
Right.
And it's real. It's just as real as gravity, even though I can't see gravity. Racism exists. It's all forms, whatever that is. Like, yeah, but I get what you're saying. It's not to deny it, but to be responsible for it.
Yeah.
beautifully put.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I would like to say something, if you don't mind.
Oh, always.
You know, I like what you said about your friend talking about the color blindness. And I read an article recently, I don't remember where, talking about color blindness as essentially blinders, you know, that it keeps us from actually seeing what the problem is, you know, by just putting it out there, saying, oh no, we're all the same, you know, we've all been given the same opportunities and the same chances, is very blind. And for me personally, it's very self-serving. So a little bit about my history is I came from a very racist past. Like, I was involved in some racist groups when I was younger, and came out of that. And the most powerful tool that I've learned through that is talking, just like the lady in the video is approaching it from a place of challenging people's privilege. Mm-hmm. You know, and you can, like, I personally can talk about how Black Lives Matter all the time, but that's not the conversation that needs to be had. Just like she said, you know, the conversation is what about my privilege is the problem? Because it's not the blatant racism that has the most toxic effect on our society, as far as I'm concerned. You know, it's the racism that exists that people don't know about. You see someone marching down the street with a burning cross and a white hood, and it's very obvious that that's a problem, and it's very easy to discount that and to walk around with our cardboard signs. But to see your friend that makes a comment and to have that gumption, I guess is the word, to tell them, like, hey man, that's privilege. And to stick to your guns, because that's where you get attacked on. It's another thing I saw recently was, if you're not willing to be offended, then you're not really interested in making a change to get us to where we need to be with this.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I absolutely am so grateful that I came back, because this has been just an amazing experience. And I thank you so much for having me and having these conversations. It's very much what I need my Sangha to be. So thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you, Mark.
I just, you know, sorry. You know, as she was talking about this, it was bringing up for me, you know, other relationships. We're talking about relationships between groups of people and the concepts we have for those groups of people. But, you know, in thinking about my marriage, which you know, that relationship was not always, you know, very functional, and a lot of it was not taking responsibility for my part of it, looking at the concepts, of myself as a husband and a man and a father, and looking at my wife and my concepts for her and my expectations for what those are supposed to be, and trying to enforce those rather than just looking at myself and understanding what my part in the whole interaction is and addressing that. Because the whole pointing the finger and talking about somebody else really, really doesn't work that well, and I don't know if this, metaphor analogy really applies or extends out to larger groups, but it comes up a lot, when I think about, whether it's around race or around any other division that we make between different groups of people and identify with ourselves. There's always a lot of, let's talk about that other group and what they're doing wrong, and not looking at our role in the relationship that's happening. And that's all. Oh, you're muted, by the way.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for sharing. And Mark, Brandon, thanks for just jumping right up there. That's actually a key part of our practice and training is to engage and to jump in without fear. And so I really appreciate your guys' contribution. Anybody else?
Jeff.
Go, Jeff.
I really appreciate this whole conversation, first of all. I'm doing another concert on Saturday. It's for the Code Green campaign. Their whole deal is to improve the mental wellness of first responders. That includes all paramedics and cops. And so I've been looking at, we planned that with them before the riots and all this stuff happened, before George Floyd was murdered. We chose that charity before then, but now it just seems perfect. And in preparation for that, I interviewed a good friend of mine, this guy Clyde Terry, who's a former LA sheriff, and he's also a very large black man. And he got into like the whole history of like, hey man, look at the 13th Amendment, and I've been doing some research on all of that, and look at the Southern strategy following the Civil War, which essentially criminalized all black people and had them put in jail so that we could rebuild the South, so that there was an extra labor force. All of this, the systematic nature of racism and in order to create profit. And that's what I keep coming back to, is like, we as human beings have been, I think racism has been around since we made fire. We murdered all the Neanderthals, and back then we were all black. While I really do appreciate the video, and I really appreciate that lady's perspective, there's a sense of like, well, I'm not going to sit around and feel guilty about it, because that's not me. That's not who I am. I didn't choose my face. Even though I do feel somewhat responsible and culpable, that doesn't get me anywhere feeling guilty. So then how do I like penetrate the conversation in a meaningful way as a white person, as who I am? And to me, it just all comes down to greed. Why did racism in the first place? Because Europeans were like, hey, look at those people, they're brown, we call them black. Then we convince our wives that it's okay to enslave them, so that we can bring them back and have them do work for us, so that we can get rich and create property and create, what became in the United States an empire. That became a national thing. So I guess what I'm pointing to is, while I do appreciate that there does exist a system of white privilege, and that if you are brown in this country, you are going to be automatically criminalized for various reasons. It's going to be harder for you to get a loan because it's systemic now. And the fact that Haley has a conversation with her parents like, no, Black lives really do matter. And, you know, that whole thing is just, that's ridiculous that that's part of the default culture that we now have. But to me, the true enemy is greed. And I feel like that's not being pointed to. You know, it's profit over people. And that's what created the system that we're in now. And that's been benefited by the fact that, you know, there are white people and there are brown people, and we can make a distinction between those two parties and say, one, white people are better than the brown people, which is a fallacy. So anyway, I just really appreciate this whole conversation, and I appreciate you guys a lot. And I don't know if the concert that we do on Saturday will make a difference. In my heart, I feel like it will. I feel like improving mental wellness of first responders is a key ingredient to getting them not to fucking put their knees on people's necks. But I do really appreciate this conversation, because I feel like this makes a difference. You know, going to protest makes a difference, but this conversation, really like parsing it out, makes a big difference.
Thanks, Jeff. I want to add a little bit to what you're saying, because even though I was raised Irish, Italian, Catholic, I don't think guilt is ever really very helpful. I think there is another possible response to the provocation of the video, which is just taking responsibility for our part in what has been created and what's being created. And I know you agree with that as well.
Yeah, totally.
It reminds me of some work I did with Harlem Children's Zone in New York City. I may have told this story, I'll tell it again anyway, where I was facilitating a workshop with the leadership of Harlem Children's Zone, very powerful professional group of people. There's actually two stories. I think the most relevant one here is that a Black gentleman took me aside at one point in the workshop and said, "Why do you guys have these leaders on the walls as icons of great leaders?" And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, that's your view of what great leadership is. He says, you got Martin Luther King, where's Malcolm X? I know I mentioned this maybe a couple weeks ago. Where's Malcolm X? And I'm bringing it up again, Jeff, just because I had that same reaction of like, well, but I'm not racist. Like, I'm not the problem. And so I had to go read Malcolm X's autobiography to get a little bit of grip on that. Just being part of the system is part of the problem. And what I don't see, what I don't recognize, the things, the reactions I have, the beliefs that I have that I'm not even aware of are the system, you know? And so it takes a lot of work to penetrate that. And, you know, for me, this practice is good at that, you know, keep drilling down and drilling in and looking down that manhole cover and seeing what is there. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to just thank Jeff for what you're doing, Jeff. I think that's an awesome thing to raise funds for. Appreciate it. And I want to say I'm not sure that it's our group that's the problem, it's the system that's the problem. One of the things that comes up for me is that each year I give to my grandchildren's college fund, and that gives them an advantage over minority and poor people. And it's a conundrum. You know, it's like, of course I want I value education. I want my grandchildren to go to college. But at the same time, I see that this is a law and a financial advantage that goes to middle-class white people, mostly white people, because mostly in the class. But what I'm saying is that it's not just us, it's the laws and the structures around the tax code and everything else. And marching may get us better elected representatives, but it needs to be that we're aware that all of these things contribute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well said. It's hard to dissect, and you know, I hope everybody understands. I'm not going at us or any one of you individually saying you are the problem. We are the problem, but to the extent that we are the system, we are the problem. It's like Melissa's both sides of the coin at the same time, right? So the other part of the Harlem Children's Zone story is I was facilitating a session on trust for them a little while later. And part of the role of facilitator is to provoke people and draw them out, right? And there was this one young Black woman, she's probably about 35 years old, and she had brought up a point that was rich and it had a lot of stuff in it. So I wanted to tease the point out. And in teasing the point out, I tried to go in, and two things happened. First, she stood up and she went like this and she said, "You stop right now. White man's been doing that to me all my life. You stop." And I had to make a decision on the fly there as the facilitator of this workshop to back down and to, you know, to shift the conversation so that we could continue in a productive fashion. And, you know, I did all right. We did all right as a group on getting over that moment. But there was a real moment of my intentions were good. My heart was good. I was doing my job. And there was an underlying context that I was blind to, and an underlying context that I was almost hopelessly unaware of in terms of knowing how to deal with it. But here's what happened in the break is the CEO of the organization, who is also Black, she came up to me and she said, "Don't let us do that to you." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Don't let us shut you down because you're white. You're here to do a job, and I hired you to do the job, and I need you to do that job. So don't you back down." And, you know, and so there I am, like right in the middle of this conversation, right? You know, best intentions, cultural context that I don't have a lot of control over. And I'm asked to do a job, and so I need to rise out of all of the concepts and try to operate purely without a lot of control over what somebody else is feeling, thinking, or has experienced in their life. It's very messy. It's very messy, and it takes a lot of work. Anybody else?
I have something. Really, this is going a little bit further with Jeff on talking about the system of greed that we've all inherited. It's so ubiquitous that we don't even notice it, except at times we might notice some people seem really involved with it more than we might be. But the fact of the matter is, it is at the root of our system. And we talk about white privilege. That's exactly where it comes from. It's all about who's invited to the game and who's got the highest 1% of money. And, you know, everybody is focused on getting there. So that separates us as a people. You know, if pretending that we're part of the greed game, then we're part of that wonderful ladder of comfort where everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. But when we start recognizing people who are not invited to the game, then we're shaking the cage a little bit. And that's where we need to get more comfortable and more responsible, I feel. And I feel like this is an area of training that I want more around. I want to workshop that piece and all of the pieces that are attached to it, so that I can go out forward into my life knowing where I'm actually coming from, instead of, you know, being a tool of some ubiquitous form that I don't personally have any I do not embrace. And that's where I want to go. I don't know how we do that, but
thoughts, comments, anybody else? Sounded like somebody was trying to speak up. Raise your hand, I can unmute you from here.
You know, what I like about this is we're having conversations about it. It's like integral part of our lives. And, you know, is it Tara Brock has this, she has the methodology called RAIN. Well, first we have to recognize it and be aware of it. And, you know, acknowledge it exists, this disparity. And then it can start. Then we can start. And I like that manhole thing. It's in here. It's in here. Where can I start? And, you know, how can I be a part of this as opposed to just watching it, being a spectator, judging it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I love this Sangha, by the way. This is powerful stuff. Yeah.
We love you too, and happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'll quit resisting that it exists.
Yeah.
I'm glad you were born, John.
Thank you.
Me too.
Go ahead, Galen.
Yeah, and there's really not much time left, I guess, if you want to stop at 11. But, you know, I want to say, you know, I'm so glad that you specifically invited me to attend this, and, you know, that Mark and Brandon, you know, were included in that, you know, and the other people. Of all the groups that I'm involved in right now, I would say this is absolutely the most relevant, you know, and pointed discussion that I'm hearing. You know, it's a great group. You know, I had this conversation with Tenshin Roshi years ago, or not this conversation, but, you know, my question was, you know, I've been to a couple of Zen centers, and literally just 2, you know, but how come everybody's white and old was my question. You know, why is that? You know, yeah. And we've talked about it over the years, you know, since then. And it's not everybody, obviously. You know, the closer you get to the inner cities, the more diverse the sanghas become. But you know, it's an issue, and I'm glad that Soto Zen America has taken it on and looking at it. You know, but how are we actually showing our commitment, or how are we showing our realization, you know, to the rest of the world, you know, by, you know, the conversations are important, but, you know, how do we throw a wider net than, rather than just become, you know, satisfied with the people that we have. And I don't know that we even need to, but it's a question that a lot of people of color ask me, you know, why do I go to the Zen Center and find out that I don't feel welcome? Nobody comes up to me and tells me I'm special. And yeah, nobody did to me either. You know, it really was, it's a different kind of thing. It's an interesting tightrope to walk.
It's an important question, Galen. And we, our son Nick, who's almost 27, did some early years with Zen in Santa Monica Zen Center before he became a teenager and went off what teenagers do. I would say, I'm not sure he'd agree with the description, but he's pretty good Buddhist through and through. And he tends to send his peers our way. And so we've seen them come in, and they come once or twice and then kind of move on. And I'm very aware of that. And I think it's an interesting assignment, or critical assignment, is how do we expand that net. We talk about, as a Sangha, how do we help the homeless? Well, I'm not sure it's like teaching Zazen, you know? And I do appreciate you and Brandon and what you said about Zen is not a philosophical practice.
Yeah, thank you for that.
You know, I mean, and it does not exist in books, even though we study books and we read books and we do ceremony and we have liturgy. Zen is a practice of experience and actualization and action, right action. And so there we are. You know, what do we do? How do we throw our bodies into it? How do we express ourselves? You know, for Jeff, he's got his concerts and his music, and some of us have or will attend marches. There's the political realm, you know, but I think it's an essential question, because you have to come down off the mountain and put your feet on the ground in the marketplace, as in the 10th ox herding picture, and have some effect in the world as it's going on. You have to exercise that positive samadhi, you know, you have to push things around in the relative world. And I appreciate the practice for its ability to take us to that absolute point. In the book we're studying in book club right now, Yamada Roshi's the Zen, the Authentic Gate, in the chapter we just covered last Tuesday, there was a lot of emphasis on one of the aims of Zen being removing subject and object, right? Collapsing the distance between subject and object so that it's subject, so that there is no object. And I heard that in the video that we played earlier, is whenever you're talking about somebody or something over there, that is the problem. It's in our 7th precept. I vow to refrain from elevating myself and blaming others. Or in the 6th, I vow to refrain from talking about others' errors and faults. Right? And that brings us down to our own expression of that is, you know, look down that manhole cover, climb down that manhole cover, spend the time on the cushion in Zazen to examine the self and find out where you really are. And then going all the way back to Dogen, to know the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things, or to recognize your oneness with the 10,000 things in all the 10 directions. For some reason, that triggered for me the notion of a supernova and the power of a supernova when a star collapses and then collapses on itself and explodes. And to me, it was a beautiful metaphor for this practice, right? Going deep, deep, deep within through Zazen. And what happens when a star goes through a supernova is it burns all the fuel at its core until there's nothing left. And then the force of gravity takes over and collapses in on itself and then explodes back out. And how beautiful an expression of enlightenment is that? We go to the core and work and go down that manhole cover and burn out all that we can find there until there's nothing left. Vast emptiness. And it all collapses in and then explodes in the most beautiful expression of our pure energy and right action possible. So, you know, I don't have the answer to this racism thing in relative terms, like, you know, John, go do this, Jeff, go do this, Galen, go do this, Lori, go do this, Dan, go do this. But I do know it's got to start diving to the center and working toward that supernova. It's kind of the supernova of the soul.
Well said.
So I think that's probably enough. I know we lost one person to the bell. Thank you everybody for hanging in there. Again, Tenshin Roshi is on with his Dharma talk in about 23 minutes for anybody that's interested. It's always good and always provocative. But for now, let's go to the 4 vows and close this out. Thank you everybody for joining. Hope to see you all again soon. There are 2 concerts next week. Jeff has a concert, as he mentioned, and Philip, who's camping with his daughter this weekend, has a dueling concert on the same evening. So I don't know what to do. They're both great.
Well, they're not. They don't. I talked to Philip because he asked my advice. They don't compete. So
Good.
mine's at 5 o'clock and his is at 6 o'clock. So you can
Beautiful.
watch.
Thank you,
An
Jeff.
evening of Zen music next Saturday night. We'll get details out to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, here we go. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible.